Hello, hello. So today I'm going to talk about some quarter time positioning and patterns by request for the lovely hot kickboxing mama, Miss Jasmine K. With quarter time, it's pretty much whenever your props or arms are in a 90-degree relation to one another. Being able to move freely around the clock with those points, so your arms are never convergent or divergent from one another while doing these patterns. You are free to move in and out, but to keep it truly quarter time, your arms are in a constant 90-degree relation to one another. First thing to practice is simply arm positioning. So if you feel dumb doing this, then you gotta have to get over it. But this will really help. Using clubs has been probably the most beneficial form or prop to get quarter time more smoothly, because you have an actual point to direct your prop to if you don't feel like using your hands. Also, it makes it easier to learn the hybrid patterns if you're doing ones in an extension versus one in an anti-spin. But first, get comfortable with getting your arms lined up to the positions they're supposed to be. So this will be the first pattern to practice with and without props. And notice that my hands, when they're down at the 6 o'clock position, and when I say 6 o'clock, I'm meaning my body's clock. So when your arms are in the 6 o'clock with your hoops, it's key that they are parallel with your thighs, not necessarily the center of your body. I'll get to that reason in just a moment. But get comfortable with just simply working with the bottom portion of the clock. If you wish to cross over, and find those positions where your arms are on their non-native side, converting back to native side. Once that's comfortable, you can work with them being on the top of the clock, whether in them staying on their native sides or switching in and out of non-native to native. When those are comfortable, pick up one hoop and start with non-dominant. I always like doing that. Now, the reason why I was saying arms in the 6 o'clock position, you'd like them to be parallel with your legs, because if I were to use the hoop as this center, one, it's a lot harder for this to be my resting position when at the bottom, because if I wanted to make this hoop in my left hand go over to its native side, I have to swing in an awkward position, really on my hand though, and I have to use my thumb and more fingers than I should have to get it back to its native side. Versus if you were using the grip that I like to do when reaching that portion of the clock, imagine now on your hoops clock, you have a 10 and 2 o'clock position. When your hand is inside of the hoop, notice that my left arm is parallel to my left thigh. Now, if I were to center my left arm and get in the habit of doing this every time I do my quarter time, I over-exaggerate where the center of that hoop is. So it's essential to make sure that your arms are parallel with your thighs, whether it be on the non-native side or if you're coming back to native side. Playing with those patterns, easiest one to get right off the bat. If you're doing them really with extensions, that's the easiest way to get to it, but I'll do this in anti-spin just to show you. Anti-spinning from one at my bottom center over to its native side and back again. This might seem very tedious, but it is a very good thing to do in the mirror, so you always know that when you're hitting that 6 o'clock position, your hoop is still centered with your body and not your hand being centered with your body. Hoop centered, hand centered, hoop centered. Now, when you get that comfortable in front of a mirror, go ahead and take that one pattern and you can change it to the top portion of the clock. Once again, 12 and 9, and then 12 and 3. Now, with a hoop, when you're hitting that 12 o'clock position, you can keep it centered because you have nothing there obstructing the view or really altering the center line that the hoop is traveling on. So when these patterns are comfortable, play with crossing the hoops. So my right, instead of going back to its native side, I will have it switch down to the 9 o'clock position on its non-native side. And while that happens, I will switch the hoop on my left side, which is native, to the top. So playing with those as well. And then also changing whether you're on the bottom or top portion of that clock. Another thing, when you start using your props, I know my arms are exaggerated, but also keep in mind the size hoop you're using, because when I put my left over on its non-native side fully extended and then my right fully extended, that can give you some ideas for new patterns to go to. But let's say that you're traveling in and out of this, your left hand constantly comes to as far as out to your wrist versus your right, which is pretty much one full extension away from the hoop that is now in that position. So when using both, try not to exaggerate as far, just so that your hoops will always line up. So play with those. Top portion of the clock, play with those. And then while also utilizing top and bottom portion of your clocks, play with those switches, drill those, left and right side, and then of course on the bottom, switches. Oops. And if you want to do them in extensions, you can. It just doesn't look as cool. But it's still a good way to know if your hands are in their proper positions when utilizing a mirror. Another thing with quarter time, you can do them in opposite directions, or you can do chasing quarter time patterns. So both hoops are traveling in the same direction around the clock. Or if I wanted to do them both in opposites, it'd be easier to start here. This is an opposite flower. You can do them in both directions. You can start in any position. Just keep in mind your entrance and exit points, because you don't want your arms to cross over into a position that you can't get out of. So I think that's as basic as I can get with quarter time right now without actually going into flower and or hybrid patterns. But then when I'm at work, I will go into a more detailed description of this. But practice this. Let me know what you think.